Hello, this is Rats with Lesson003 from my program. Today we're going to talk a bit about correspondence chess. It's one essential part of my program. This game was played against a reasonably strong and experienced postal chess master with an ICCF, that's International Chess Rating, International Chess Federation rating of 2300, and I was new to ICCF and out to make a name for myself. Now I want to make a few points that go back to my introductory lesson 001, starting with the assertion from former world's correspondence champion Hans Berliner that one must take about 3 hours for every move, and a lot of you might be thinking that's just way too much time to spend. But let's just talk about it for a moment. By him saying 3 hours a move, this is mainly meant for master class, and that's what I wanted to play in, was the master class. But even if you're not a master, 3 hours a move is going to give you a lot of time to really look into the position and find possibilities. If your opponent is spending less time, that's just going to give you a tremendous advantage in calculations, because you're going to see more than your opponent does. Alright, so let's take that a step further. I want to give you just a little bit more about my background on why I got back into correspondence chess. I had discovered it was crucial for my advancement to masterhood. I had started playing it when I was rated over the board 2000, and I took a year off from playing tournament chess. Circumstances in life just prohibited it, but I got into postal to be able to play in my free time. And when I came back to over the board play a year later, was rated 2000. I immediately dropped 100 points due to lack of practice, but 3 months later I was up to 2200, and I owe most of it to the fact that I had done all this work analyzing chess in the last year. The other thing I owe it to was I was playing a lot of tournaments. I was going just about every night of the week and playing in weekenders and meeting a lot of strong players, so that helped. Everyone's going to be different on this. Now, these were played by postcards, so this particular game lasted 10 months. That may seem like an eternity to all of you, but when you have a number of games going, it really isn't that bad. There's always something fresh to look at. And let me talk a little bit about how I took notes in those days as well. I took a loose leaf binder, and I had dividers and paper in between each one for each game, and I would start taking notes. If a certain opening developed, I would place either the main line or at least what book I was consulting, so that I could refer to it and what page number, and be able to sort my way through the opening. And let's just digress for a second, and I'll talk about the opening I chose here. There's an old saying that although white moves first, black selects the opening. So if white mostly is going to play 1 E4 or 1 D4, and he's going to be prepared for just about every main line that black plays, but at least black gets to pick which one he wants. And one of my complaints or unhappiness with chess back in the 70s, when I was still around 1800, is I would spend a lot of time studying an opening, like the Sicilian Najdorf became all the rage, and I really put a lot of work into it as black. But when I took it to tournaments, I discovered that all my opponents knew it just as well, if not better than I did, so it really wasn't all that useful of an opening for me. I'd reach 25 moves of book position and had no way to win, and often lost. So I kind of thought that what I wanted to do was to get into some lesser played lines. Now, just because a grandmaster plays a line and you see this thing happen 400 or 500 times a year, doesn't mean it's the opening for you. You're not a grandmaster. I'm not a grandmaster. I wanted to get into something my opponent would be less prepared for and something I would be more prepared for. So I elected to play some lesser played lines against the main choices of d4 and e4. Now, as far as I approach my games with white, you'll see that soon enough. But this opening I played, let me just show you the first couple moves. Okay, d4. I developed an idea to play against d4, and I'll show you what it is. Here it is. It's called the Chigorin defense to the Queen's Gambit declined. Not a very popular opening. However, one of the greatest chess authors of current times is an international master by the name of John Watson, and 31 years ago he published a book which is considered a classic on this defense. If you can find a copy, get it. Maybe some of you have it. But the reason I compliment Mr. Watson so much is because he will just put a lot of fresh analysis into his variations. In other words, try this, try that. What about this move? So someone played this move. Look at it. Look what it does. And all of his writings are just full of all these untested ideas. And for me, that was kind of interesting. Gee, instead of playing something everyone's playing, I can play something nobody's playing. And we'll take his word for it. He's the international master. I'm not. I'll play it and I'll try and justify it. And I found that to be a great motivator to prove that he was right and to make myself work harder. So I made these choices to defend these crazy positions, and they may not be for you, but you're going to learn a lot from just how I approach these, as you'll see as this game unfolds and other games I'll be showing you. You'll see a lot of fresh creative chess, and at the same time I'll explain exactly how I did my work so that you can duplicate that no matter what opening you play. Now, if you're interested in playing this line as black, there's going to be more games showing you more of the ideas. And why? Because I played it, and that's what I have to share for examples. And you're really going to enjoy this. And the only way to learn an opening like this is just to simply sit down and start playing it. Get your hands on the books and start playing book variations and see what happens. So the Watson book is very valuable because he has a nice opening sequence at the beginning of the book. He shows the different kind of positions that can occur and what white and black want to do from them. Very useful to learn from. Okay, so back to this game. He played knight c3. Now here is where I start really working. There's other moves white can play. Those aren't important now. They'll be seen in other games. But I have to make a decision of which move I want to play from here. So I would, at this point, now sit down and start playing over some of the variations in the book and see what do I like, what don't I like. Is there something funny I'd like to play in here? Whatever. I'll start looking. And then I'll do a little analysis on my own, because you can't always trust what's in book. Often there'll be glaring mistakes. I remember when I first tried postal chess, I played a variation suggested by Grandmaster Victor Korchnoi in a book, and Korchnoi's move was a horrible blunder, and I dropped the exchange in 2 pawns for it. So book errors happen. You got to investigate on your own and see if they're valid. Okay. So I determined that what the best move, or at least the move I'd like to play positions from, was d takes c4. And again, white has several choices. We'll only show you white's choice here, d5. And now I play knight e5. And again, from this position, white has several moves to make. And I'll show you what he did. And he played queen d4. Now, you might want to pause the video for a moment and start considering candidate moves, but let's just evaluate for a second. Black is up a pawn, but he can't hold it. Eventually it's going to drop. If the knight moves away, we can just take it. If we can keep the knight there, then the knight has some nuisance value because it's holding on to the pawn. But Watson had a pretty creative idea that nobody had ever tried before, and to my knowledge maybe nobody has, but I doubt that. Somebody must have tried it. I haven't checked analysis on this opening in years, but it's a very interesting move, and it's the kind of one you want to play to lull your opponent to sleep. And here it is, f6, and anybody who's playing white will look at that and say, oh, yummy, what a horrible move. And I guess to some degree it is. You're putting a pawn on the square of your knight goes to. You're exposing your king a little bit. You're not doing much to help your development. This black squared bishop is still locked in. So naturally white's going to say, how can I exploit that? Well, the most obvious move that a lot of people would probably just play without hesitation is f4, and that's exactly what he did. Now f7 is open for the knight, and you'll see that's the reason. One of the underlying reasons behind f6 is to drop the knight back to f7 and redeploy it. Okay, that comes at a cost of time. White continues his development. Now, I believe this is still in the book, but not for much longer. So pretty soon we're going to be on our own, and that's fine with me. I want it on our own. I want it mano y mano, me versus him, in a position that's never been seen before, where the better player is going to find the better moves and come out ahead. Not from a position that 500 Grandmaster games show it's a dead even game and you can't win. So e6, e4, quite natural move to play. And here I took. Now at this point I'm pretty certain it's when it left book, and I guess white's approach, because it's kind of an unexpected move, most people would probably take on d5 with the pawn, but he took with the queen of all things, and I guess his reasoning is he's a little better developed and he'll happily trade queens now and have a little more board room and then find a way to get the better endgame and beat me. I guess that's the logic. So I took, and then he takes back the knight. Now he's got the threat on c7 that I have to deal with. But you really don't have to worry about threats, because one move threats, because you have 3 hours, you have 3 days if you need to on the average in these games by postcard, or 10 moves in 30 days was our time control, so you could take 12 days on a move before you started paying a penalty of double time for every move there over that. But I'd already analyzed this move, and let me just break for a moment and explain how I continue. Before, in my notebook, before I had all the opening notes in there. Now I'm going to write down various candidate moves. In other words, I'll sit at this board and say, well, what do I want to play? Well, let's see, we got to take care of c7. If we don't want to give up the pawn, there's pretty much 2 moves, king d8 and bishop d6, and I don't see another move right off the top of my head. But essentially, I might analyze king d8 and try to say, well, what would I do if I had white here, and bishop c4, and then continue my analysis, try a couple other moves for black, and then come back. And ultimately, I would select bishop d6 as the best move. And then when I got his move back after that, then I would go back and carry my analysis forward and double check it to make sure it was accurate, and start looking for more things, go a little deeper, and always keep building on whatever notes I had. And if I got something back in the mail unexpected, I might panic at first because, didn't consider that move, then get into it and find out maybe it was a blunder. So with my time, I just had a notebook and a pencil, and now I didn't have a database, anything like that. I guess now you don't have to go that route of writing everything down. I believe programs like ChessBase, you can just set up the position, do your analysis on that board, and it will record and save everything. So how times have changed. Okay, bishop d6, that's the obvious move, and then he takes back. And again, I'm not going to go into the great deal of analysis of all the variations I showed. Trust me, they hold up. I played I believe, the best move every time, or close to it, and everything was justified with a lot of hard work. Okay, now I felt it was time to get rid of that knight, and here I throw a check at him. Now let's stop for a moment. Well, not just yet. One more move. Okay, c6. Okay, now I want to drive his bishop off that diagonal. So this is a extremely sharp move. Get the bishop off this diagonal, or let him trade it for my knight. So he stopped that, which gives me a hole on b4 that may come in useful later. It's at least I've gained something. But just taking a look at the position, the queen side is pretty equal. The white rook and white bishop haven't moved. Same with the counterpart, and the other two remaining bishops are both controlling equivalent diagonals. The black bishop controlling a7 to g1, and the white bishop controlling a2 to g8. The white knight is a little better placed, and white has a couple of pawns controlling the center, so you could argue that maybe white's a little better here. And instead of castling, I just play king e7, and I believe black's completely equal here. I've got the better king position than he does. The drawback to a move like king e7 might be if the pawn center can open up and he gets some nuisance checks against my king and perhaps generate some other threats. But I calculated that I could play king e7, and it's much better than castling short, which walks right into a pin. Let's just show you. Now to release the pin, I've got to park the king on h8, or move the pawn to g6 and then move the king up. So king e7 is perfectly logical. Okay, f5. Now this might be over optimism on his part. He's saying, I'm going to restrict your light squared bishop and open up the diagonal for my dark squared bishop. But it does give me a hole on e5 that I might be able to occupy soon. I don't want to go in there just yet. He would just take it, and I lose the fact that I have this wonderful square and a target, a backward pawn on the open file. But I'll maneuver around a little bit till I can get it. Now I bring my rook into play, and black is fine here. He's caught up in development. The king's better placed, and both sides still haven't developed their queen rook and queen bishop. I meant to throw this in too. One thing about this opening, I've talked before about in some of these games about how often you'll see players will have their white queen rook and queen bishop sitting at home for a long time, and I've made a statement in effect, the side is giving odds of a rook and a bishop. Well, one thing about the Chigorin defense is in most lines that black queen bishop comes out quick. It'll go to g4, and everything comes out on the queen side very quickly. So black doesn't run into that problem, and often white will. Okay, let's go on. Okay, bishop f4. Now I decided that I'm happy to trade the dark squared bishops. I'll have a slightly better bishop because he has a couple of pawns on white squares, but he doesn't want to trade. And this kind of looks like an odd move because it gives up b5, but I need to get the rest of my queen side developed, and I now plan to activate the bishop along the c8 b7 diagonal. So that'll connect my rooks. Yeah. Now he attacks my rook and takes that diagonal from my bishop, but that's fine. I'm doing okay here. Now he starts to redeploy his knight, but you can see black has completely equalized the position as far as development goes. Both sides have their men out, and black has the better king, and I've got the e5 square for the taking, but I don't take it yet. Oh yeah, I did. I'm sorry. Okay. And now I get my final piece out. Now he's undeveloped his knight, and I've got all my guys out, so I'm actually ahead in development now, and I'm occupying a nice square with my knight. So you could argue that black is even better now. And we just start improving the position of our pieces. knight to d3 kicks the pawn on b2, and in some cases it might be threatening to go to f2, so that bishop ties that bishop down. So white eliminates the threat on the pawn, can't just give up a pawn. And now knight b4, finally occupying that square that I mentioned earlier. And this restricts his knight, because his knight can't move in this position, because I'll have knight c2 available. So for instance, knight c4, I just take it and drop my knight into c2, and he cries. Okay, so he covers c2 so he can move his knight, and I just open up the file a little bit so I can get my rooks going, and he gets his knight c4 in, and now I redeploy the bishop. Now I've got a threat. It's a threat that can be defended against. White might miss it in a blitz game, but he's not going to miss it in a correspondence game, and he guards it. But the white game's going to fall apart real quick here, and you'll see in a moment. Okay, now I grab the bishop pair, and this is a point where it's now time to start endgame study. And I call it the Averbach series, although he didn't author all of them. Some were co-authored but with others, or with the rook endings. I think pawn endings had entirely different authors. But there's rook versus rook, bishop versus bishop, bishop versus knight, rook versus knight or bishop, queen versus rook or knight or bishop. Whatever possibility there is, there's a book for it. And I use those. I also have the 4-volume set authored by Chigorin, which is in German, and I can read enough German to get by to understand that. Those are my sources. So I take his rook. Now I've got the e4 pawn is no longer backward. It's now a pass pawn, but it's isolated. And I've got some threats. I can work on that pawn now. And that's exactly what I did. And it was a goner. And I win it. And like I say, he's going to just fall apart here. I can't quite take here yet, or I don't think I could. I do in a moment. I think it was due, maybe it was due to the fact that he had some kind of a trick on the file. I don't remember. But now is the time to take it. And black is clearly winning this. I don't even have to play an ending. And 2 pawns down with no compensation. He decided that he would just resign. Okay, so black did very well there. The game was in new territory, required new maneuvering, but everything followed a logical plan. So what was interesting is I had another game going on at the exact same time with this same variation, and I'm going to show you that one. We'll see how these things compare. Okay, this player was rated a little lower, 2212 ICCF, and naturally we go into this variation, which I've shown you, and there it is. It's going to diverge from the other game here in a moment. F4, we saw that before, but now he decided he was going to take the pawn before white played e4. Now we get a tempo on the queen, and here comes another interesting move which was recommended in Watson's book, and I played it, even gave it an exclamation point. Now I've played f5. Now that pawn is moved twice, but it does a number of things. It also does some things you might not want to agree with. I've got a couple of holes now in my position, e5 and e6, and a lot of you might not want to do that, but Watson gave some analysis to justify it. We'll see how it develops. To some degree, he can still play e4 if he wants, but I'm going to end up with some tempos. For instance, he can't play e4. Actually, takes, knight here, and piling up on that, although he has a check. But all that analysis is important. I have the original analysis on this, and I have Watson's analysis, so it was fine. He didn't go into that line. Now we just continue. Now I've got that f6 square back for my knight, so that we'd given that up. At least we got that back in return. And he plays there. Looks logical. White's probably just beaming with joy here with his position. But I just start maneuvering, get my guys out. Got to do that. And he decides that he needs to get his developed. And castles. Now the king sides are pretty close to the same. White's knight's maybe slightly better and White's queen better. So White does seem to have the advantage of the first move. But there's a game of chess to be played, and it's in the middle game. And let's see what happens. Okay, a6, kind of a slow move, but it takes away b5 from his knights. So that's kind of important. Again, I'm doing a lot of analysis on this and choosing moves that I feel are logical. And I defy anybody to prove where White was ever winning this game. Although White could maybe try something different to stir things up. I don't know. He didn't find anything. Okay, rook e8. Now the idea of that was to prepare e6, and even though it does open up the diagonal for that bishop, so some of you might not want to play it, but it does a few other things. It gets rid of a little bit of the crampness that I had on the king side. It'll get rid of my backward pawn, but it's going to give him one backward pawn. So I don't mind so much in exchange, even if it costs me the bishop pair, because I've got a couple of well-placed knights, and I can drop them into e4 here shortly. You'll see. Okay, so he happily grabs the bishop pair, and now he's saying he wants to hop into c5. Again, it looks perfectly logical, but I have a counter. There it is. And if he wants to play knight takes c5, he can do it. Fine. I'll at some point I may be taking on d3. I can exchange on c5 happily, and then bring the other knight into e4. Black is fine here. White's got the bishop pair, but Black's got active play. So right about this time, there's a long series of exchanges here, and a lot of tactics. And I spent hours on it. I'm sure he spent hours on it as well. And the net result of these tactics is it comes out in my favor. So I'm not going to sit here and show every possibility. Just suffice it to say that everything was fine for Black. Okay, now there's a pin that I've got to deal with. Now give a check. And like I say, a lot of tactics are flying here. Got to do everything just right. But you'll see it works out fine. Now I've got the fork, but he has a counter reply, a temporary queen sacrifice. And the pin. I have to give my queen back. Now look at that. A quick reduction of most of the material on the board, and we're suddenly in an endgame. And I'm the one with the bishop now, not him. So I was quite happy here. I've got a pawn majority on the queen side. His king side pawn majority is a little less fluid than mine because he has a backward pawn. So Black has done quite well with this. And again, showing you all the possible variations through that big flurry of exchanges isn't important. It was all justified, and Black has thought a little better than White has and planned accordingly. So time to get the queenside pawns going. And here I went ahead and let him get back the knight for bishop because I figure that I'll be fine here. So now we're in a rook ending, and Black is certainly poised better, and it's just a routine win now for Black. Okay, you'll see it. Now I start bringing my king up, and he starts doing the same. Now look, his king can't go any further, and he can't trade rooks. He'll go into a lost king and pawn in endgame. So I just start spending my extra pawn moves and let him run out of moves. Now he starts shuffling his king. I just improve my pawn position while he's stuck going back and forth. Now it's time to redeploy the rook. And white's clearly in trouble here. Now he's run out of pawn moves. Check. And at this point, white decided he was going to lose. And it's pretty easy to see why. I'm going to trade rooks and just win the king and pawn ending. Doesn't matter where he goes, I'll take his rook next. And my king comes into d3, and I start eating pawns. And he just doesn't have enough to try to go after the a-pawn and queen. Okay, so there's two games with this opening, and wouldn't you know, about 4 years later, this game, oh, by the way, this game lasted a year and a half, maybe too long for a lot of you, but it was just fine for me. But in the summer of 1990, I was invited to play in an over 2,000 event, and I went ahead and accepted, and it was an interesting once-a-week tournament. I can't remember all the details about it unless I stop and think about it, but that's not important. But wouldn't you know, I got another chance to actually play this over the board, and I'm going to show you that game. So my preparation for this has been the two games you've seen, and certainly white is not going to be familiar with that opening. And let's have some fun, see what we can do. Okay, this gentleman's USCF rating, according to my records, was 2335. He'd been a master for close to 40 years. As far as I know, he's still living, and he's still got a master rating. Very nice gentleman, great chess player, and let's see what happens. Okay. There it is. And I'm sure his eyes lit up. And we follow the similar path of the first game. Now in the first game, my opponent played queen takes d5, and here he played e takes d5. And so now I get to stop and think and play a fresh game. You know, games aren't going to repeat. You're going to diverge from whatever theory there was at some point. So I play knight d6 and bishop takes c4. Now my next move really questions this whole opening. Now if you look at this, what's black done? He's moved the knight 5 times out of 10 moves. The other 5 moves have been pawn moves. White's almost completely ahead in development, and everything black owns is on the back rank. The diagonal towards the white king castle position is open. White looks lost. Anybody having this position as white is just going to say, yum. And I said that before because anyone would think that. And I have to laugh. The tournament bulletin, they published a record of all the games and gave us all a copy the next week. The comment from the annotator said, black moved his knight 5 times in the first 10 moves and got away unpunished. So I've already given a hint. I don't lose this game. But I got a kick out of that. They just didn't understand this opening. So now bishop d6. Got to park that bishop there, block the pawn. We don't want a discovered check coming our way necessarily. Okay. Now let's block the file so he doesn't check me. Now he starts improving the position of his pieces. He's still ahead in development. My queen side is behind. He's got a queen developed and I don't. He's got both his knights developed. I've got my bishop and knight developed, and his king is castled, and I'm not. I'm still a couple of tempos behind. So I castle. And he plays f5. And like I say, he's probably just saying, yum. This position is great. I'm crushing. I've got knight c6 coming in. I've got an open diagonal for my bishop. Then my queen rook comes into play. Meanwhile, the black pieces suck. This will be over in a few moves. And this is an over-the-board game. I'd never seen this position before, and my next move must have entirely shocked him. Pause the video and see what you might think. What might black do here? Okay, you've now resumed the video. My next move is going to shock you. C6. And you look at that and you say, what? You can't do that. It gives up a pawn with check. And that's exactly what it does. It gives up a pawn with check. And there's another pawn for the taking. And very, very bold move on my part. I calculated that I could do this. Let's just look at a variation or two. Take a moment. Okay, the natural move that you might first want to see is, can we get away with grabbing the other pawn? Because if we can get away with it, then we're a pawn up. Okay, so naturally I have to play bishop takes. Now let's look a little bit here. That opens up knight e6 for the knight. Now there's a fork. Well, black has a resource. We'll stop and give check, and he needs to run to the corner. Now my rook's under attack. So what do I want to do? Well, I could move it to c8. But watch this. Rook c8, okay? Now white comes over here and threatens mate. Now I got to deal with that, right? Okay. And like I said, there's a lot of crazy possibilities here. Let me see if I can remember that one line I was looking at. I was looking at that a little earlier today. There was one, it's not forced by any means, but black ends up getting a checkmate against white, and there's some crazy tactics in here. I know the G file opened up, and it's not all that important. I know the G file opened up, and black was able to take down here, and both sides stopped and took each other's queen. And I guess somehow this knight got over to a4 and took this, and black was opening up the G file and taking the queen, and then taking this with a check, driving the king over, and then the bishop was checking, and white was having to block it. Then a little discovered check, and the king would have to go back, and anyways, it ended up in a mate. But it's not all that important. Let's just go back. If anything, even if white doesn't play knight e6, let's look at the black game. For a pawn sacrifice, we've got the bishop pair. We've opened up the board for the bishops. I mean, look at those diagonals. Those are diagonals you love to have if you have the two bishops. There's a tempo on the queen to get the rook developed. Black's got incredible chances here. I would have to say that's compensation for the pawn. And we come back to thinking deficiencies that I talked about in lesson 1. Let's just back it up. Most black players wouldn't even consider c6 here because it gives up a pawn with check. Nobody's going to play that move. I had forgotten I'd played it, and when I looked at it, I said, "Oh yeah, I remember that. This will be great for this lesson." And that's exactly what it is. You overcome a thinking deficiency by thinking of something you would normally reject. Okay, I talked about thinking deficiencies in the first lesson. I couldn't say it all there. That lesson would have gone for 10 hours. The way to cure thinking deficiencies is say, which move wouldn't I play here? Well, c6 is certainly one of them that you wouldn't play. So find a move, play it anyway, and see what happens. Analyze it. So that's what I did. Okay, c6. Now I got to park the king. Well, he decides that he doesn't want to take that pawn, and he didn't. And I took it. And really, he can't quite take it just yet. There's some tricks in here that I won't necessarily get into. But now I start catching up in development. Now I still don't have my queen, rook, and queen bishop developed, but I just developed my queen with a tempo. I'm attacking a pawn down here, so I'm catching up in development. He's got to deal with that. And now I slide this rook on over, and there's reasons for that. We don't need to go all into them too much. And White says, well, I got to play that knight into e6. It belongs there, but that's fine. I'll just take it off, get rid of a develop a piece of mine and get rid of his most advanced piece. I don't need the bishop pair here. We can't have everything we want. Okay, now, if anything, I don't remember what I played until I see it. If anything, just a simple candidate move like rook b8 develops black's last piece, and black is fine. Game's even. But I played bishop e5. That's fine. Put some indirect pressure on b2. Okay, we'll see what he does. Bishop c5. Okay, fine. Knight d5. Now, here's a curious point in the game. Black is entirely equal here. Game is fine. Black's fine. But one of my weaknesses that keeps me from going up is one movers. I'm just terrible at them. And I even managed to make several of them playing slow correspondence chess. And I committed one right here, but luck was with me. He didn't see it. The correct move to play is d4, and black's fine. But I make an oops, but I got away with it. Okay. White to play and do the best he can. Stop the video. Did you see it? Yeah, it's simple. Bishop b6. Ouch. Like I say, silly moves like this have held me back. I should be over 2,400 by now, but I'm not. That's a whole nother story. Now you see what my weakness is. Okay, but let's back it up. Even a grandmaster, say he plays a beautiful game, is just dominating move after move after move, and finally blunders and stalemates his opponent. Well, he didn't win, he drew. But that doesn't take away from the game he played, or he drops his queen in an ending where he has a queen up for a bishop because his opponent just won't resign. Well, he's going to lose that, just like I should and could have lost this. But it doesn't take away from the overall game. I played this very well, and even though I could have lost and should have lost, I didn't lose. So I got away with it, and I'll show you the last few moves here. He took here. Now I'm safe. Rook takes. Now he finds it. But I've got a counter. Give up my queen, and I get it back. And I can't remember who offered the draw here, but we shook our hands, and I was quite happy. I hope you enjoyed these 3 games. I really did. There's something there, and this is the way to get better at chess. Look at different ideas. Play your game, because then you're finding your moves and new ideas and new positions. All right. Thank you so much for your time. This concludes Lesson 3, and I will be back next week with another one.